to part 2 of this morning. Next up, we've got Nick Chapallaz from GeoPlace. He will be discussing the importance of mapping and geospatial data to local authorities in the UK.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Right, I've got various mics. My voice is quite loud. There's this one here and that one there. So can you hear me? Gary, got me. Yeah, good. So, how many people are from local government here? 2. Great. Which is our biggest sector of geospatial users in the UK? Local government. Okay, so I thought I'd just kind of take us a little bit of a wander into local government and just kind of give you a sense of the kind of breadth and diversity of use of mapping and geospatial data and its importance. It's important to us as an organisation as well, GeoPlace. How many people know who GeoPlace is? Yes, good. About a third of you. So hopefully you will learn something by the end of this session. I'm clicking. Down, is it? Okay, down. So GeoPlace was formed in 2010. It was formed as a result of a statement in Parliament to say that the nation needed a single view of addresses for the nation so that government didn't get itself confused about where people were and were communicating properly and a single view of the space of property, as it were. In 2011, GeoPlace was formed as a joint venture partnership between the Local Government Association and Ordnance Survey. The primary reason for the involvement of the Local Government Association, of course, is that the local authorities name and number and have the legal responsibility for naming and numbering streets and land and property. And in the mid-90s, we'd created some standards to catch that information, BS 7666, and many local authorities were using those standards to record their address information and beginning to use that at the core of their work in those organisations. Of course, Ordnance Survey reaches all parts of the UK geospatial sector in terms of its distribution, so a clear stakeholder in that, and it had predecessor products, Address Layer 2, Address Point, and so on. GeoPlace was formed, and we're responsible for 2 data sets, databases, the National Street Gazetteer and the National Address Gazetteer. And they are now both UK-wide data sets through our relationships with Channel Islands and Scotland and Northern Ireland and so on. So, you know lots about Ordnance Survey, and some Ordnance Survey folk here. I thought I'd just talk about the local government angle to it because it is so critical to the foundation, I think, of so much geospatial data in the UK economy. And the LGA invest time, effort, energy, and their key interest in what we do is delivering efficiency and change and improvement back into local authorities. And that's kind of wrapped up in their kind of strapline statement, but it comes to life even more when you begin to look at what they state local government to be. Local government is responsible for a range of vital services for people and businesses in defined areas. So every local authority is responsible for a geography, and it has to have a real sense of that geography and real knowledge of that geography, and they create and manage critical data sets in relation to many aspects of that local environment. In fact, these are the key topics. So every local authority that you come across will be dealing with this list, whether it's planning, whether it's fire and rescue, in relationship with emergency services, housing, tall buildings, of course, Grenfell we heard about yesterday, communities, culture, all of these sorts of things, encouraging economic growth in a particular area. So, there are also significant pressures on local government, many of them financial, many of them resource-based, and they have to balance what they're doing. They have to make the most of the assets that are available to them, and what we tend to promote to them is data. Data being core to the work they do, recognising that, and some of the most successful authorities now are really investing properly in data and recognising that geospatial is the core to that, understanding the relationship between people and place. So giving a geographic reference to a kind of identity to people, where they're living, where they're operating, where they're working, and the interactions between those two things. So we completely advocate data at the heart of successful future local government, and the LGA are very much behind that, and working closely with them to develop more and more campaigns. We sort of say, it's your most valuable asset outside your people you have. Data is what is going to really sustain you going forward. I'm very interested to hear the discussions about AI earlier. AI is only really as good as the data that goes into it. So if many of these source data sets aren't of the quality we need, we're not going to get the answers out that we need. It's that garbage in, garbage out, which we were talking about probably in the 80s. So data at the heart of things, enabling processes. So we encourage authorities to think about core business processes around planning and environment and so on, matching the data to deliver those processes, and thinking about things like AI and systems after that. These kind of things come and go, but actually enabling different software around that data and to get it out and reach parts of organizations is absolutely critical. So, what does GeoPlace do? This red triangle is what we primarily do, and then the 6 points along the bar there. So we have a relationship with every authority in the UK, and every authority sends us updates on street and address changes on a daily basis. We process in the order of about 20 million changes to the data on an annual basis, on average. We match in a whole suite of other data sets from Scotland, Royal Mail, to give postcode content, the Ordnance Survey base map, so we've always got the correct coordinates for address entities. And we do these things. We load, we link, we validate, we enrich, and we publish. There are about 46.5 million, probably the number's going up, what we call basic land and property units in the core data. We've referred to address base already today. Address base premium is that primary item. All it can be taken now as the National Geographic database address data. And about 1.7 million streets in that data environment, and that's available to the marketplace generally via Ordnance Survey. And I'll come to that a little bit more, but obviously, we talked about ADINA as well, and perhaps we need to revisit some of the licensing to make that available through that mechanism too. So these are gazetteer data sets. So what is a gazetteer? It can appear as a series of dots on maps. Really, it's an index. It's an index about a particular location, how it's described generally in the real world. Not just postal addresses, we're talking about every addressable entity across the nation. If you want a little sample of it, do have a look at Find My Address, Find My Street. Those aren't for commercial use, they're for us as citizens to find out what our UPRNs and USRNs are. I'll tell you what those are in a minute. Particularly Find My Street is a service that's used by many authorities to publish what they call their formal list of streets, so you can tell whether a street is adopted or maintainable at public expense. Find My Address also covers Scotland. It's kind of got that whole kind of UK data in there, and you can understand kind of authoritative addresses of particular locations. So what else is with this index? Well, here's the list. So, of course, X and Y coordinate, this authoritative address, the local authority address, organisation names, cross-references, a whole load of life cycle information. So data is entered into the gazetteers at its very early stage when it's, in effect, begins life as footings on a new build site, and remains in the data all through its life, even past that. So through its as a historic record, its classification, whether it's residential, commercial, when it's kind of various update dates and statuses that go along with that. And then two key fields, the unique street reference number and the unique property reference number. Who's heard of those identities before? Okay, so probably the similar people who raised their hands for others. So just to give you an idea of, or kind of more insight on that, unique property reference number is a unique identifier for every addressable object in the UK. It's a 12-digit numeric number, which means it's machine readable. Think of it as a national insurance number or a car plate, registration plate. It's critical for effective data sharing and integration, and it's allocated at day one of the instance of an address, and it persists throughout its life cycle. And it's allocated as ranges from GeoPlace in this work we do to aggregate the national data. In July 2020, I'm delighted to say that the Open Standards Board agreed, and our work with Claire and the Geospatial Commission at the time meant that UPRN and USRN and the related coordinates are made available as open data. So if you go to the Ordnance Survey website, 2 data sets you can download, OS Open UPRN and OS Open USRN, and those are available under open government license terms, but it also, those identifiers are mandated for use across government. And there's a reason for that, because they enable connectivity of data and use of data in many ways. At the heart, they are core to the processes in which local authorities are operating. So every time a utility wants to dig a hole in the road, they need a permit. And they need a USRN for that, and they have to apply to the local authority. So that's a key example process, but you know and can recognise many of those. If all those systems exist in isolation, then your authority isn't going to be particularly effective or dynamic. So UPRN and USRN are recognised as the most effective tools for local authority linking. Increasingly, this is recognised as the case and the requirement within central government and more widely across the commercial sector. And I'll come to that too. So imagine being able to ask, show me everything we know about an organisation. Here's its UPRN, here's its in the organisation about a particular location, UPRN, USRN, and then being able to pull that from any number of systems across the authority, and knowing that those are all interconnected within those organisations. So that's giving accuracy and certainty, it's giving efficiency, it's building intelligence, and it enables much greater innovation in kind of the services that local authorities can deliver. Go back to that list I showed you to begin with and the breadth and work of local authorities. But we're also finding, and have been finding, particularly over the last decade, probably longer, adoption across the commercial sector, just highlighting a few here. Insurance is an extremely big user of the address-based data sets and UPRN and USRN. Financial services growing, but you can see transport, energy, the list goes on, but that's a kind of a story in the examples there for another day. If you're interested in finding out more about this, come to the GeoPlace website. We have a map-based interface to search for a whole suite of case studies produced largely by local authorities and emergency services about their use of the data and how they are driving efficiencies and benefits through their organisations, and they're categorised by theme. Just to kind of go into some of those, the examples tend to be, the biggest examples tend to be around the core of integration of systems with authorities. So Leeds City Council is a good example, but there are more straightforward examples, say at Rushmore, where they've kind of managed their waste management routes in a much more effective way, knowing which buildings they need to get to and doing that in the right order and using the street gazetteer data to do that and driving efficiencies. And I'll come into some more examples. Probably at the moment our leading light is Nottingham. Nottingham have, while they might have huge financial pressures, they have also demonstrated huge benefit from their work in using the street gazetteer and the land and property gazetteer, their address data, to deliver benefit through data integration, business rates, so identifying more businesses that should be paying the right level of rates, social care and early help services, safer housing, waste management, which is the bin collection one, and working place parking levies. And we put up kind of a badge on their work, which is this 6 to 1. So every pound they've invested in their gazetteer data, then they've got a six-fold return on that work on average, which is kind of pretty big. And we're seeing this build. So we did that study about 4 years ago, and it was 4 to 1. We're expecting in the next 2 or 3 years that'll be at least 8 to 1. We get some other kind of cool, funky applications of this stuff, of course. So this is the City of Bath. highly complex medieval city and complex and tight street network, how did they identify their low emission zones? Well, they used the street gazetteer to identify the streets within particular areas, did some work around street widths, and then were able to plot and map that out. Another example with Conwy Borough Council, County Borough Council, and the work they did to mitigate ash dieback. And Mott MacDonald were involved in this, so that may come up again in a minute. But ash, big problem, overlapping. They found lots of the trees beside roads, and a huge risk to the public if the kind of branches fall down and so on. So plotted and used their street gazetteer call for that. And work for people like Nottingham City. Just about got time for this. Nottingham University involved with Nottingham City Council to build some 3D models, particularly useful for pre-planning, pre-application assessments, strategic planning, site assessments, and general public engagement. And I'm going to try to run this little video. Here we go. Of course, using all of that street gazetteer and address data, building in the Ordnance Survey portfolios, being able to drop in BIM models into that, being able to engage public and being able to see what the impact of that is, assessing from different angles, line of sight, obviously a huge aspect of that, from different places, in different parts of the city, and then being able to assess the impact of the site, kind of overlays on shadows, and then being able to use building heights, of course, highly relevant. Every authority is responsible for identifying tall buildings in their area, and that information is passed through to the building safety regulator, but then we can also, and that's relevant to Grenfell, but we can also do the kind of rendering piece as well, and build up that kind of intelligence area, and then also start to do analysis in building in other geospatial layers. So the work of Mick Dunn and his team at Nottingham kind of sets the tone for the kinds of things that are achievable within local government and some of the things that have happened. And of course, Nottingham University are not far away from this, so thank you for the slides, Gary, and the kind of the physical rendering of this into kind of projected form, augmented reality, and being able to kind of take different views and overlay and kind of assess that in kind of a physical way as well, is great where local authority are collaborating with others. Local authority also begins to collaborate more and more with government. So in this case, in Wales, off the back of COVID, using some of the priority registers to identify vulnerability and using some of the matrices to do that, using UPRN as a proxy for individuals, being able to map where vulnerable people are in particular locations, and then when events happen, we had a lot of storms and so on, being able to identify those individuals, or when there are fire incidents, being able to connect agencies with that. And we're seeing this happen more and more widely. So this is an example from the Building Digital UK, so the gigabit rollout, where central government is using UPRNs to identify areas that don't have gigabit connectivity and are publishing tenders for that, which companies like Freedom Fibre and City Fibre and others are winning, and they're using the address data. And of particular interest, top right-hand corner, is where they can make the connections in a particular area against those address locations. The map in the middle shows the kind of wayleaves and kind of adopted roads, roads they need to avoid, and so they can really set up their planning and make sure they're delivering the most efficient kind of installation service that they can. So, a whistle-stop tour. I think local government is the biggest community of geospatial users, and you can begin to see why perhaps we need some outreach to that community to bring them in, and kind of that shared expertise is kind of a huge thing, and fundamental to our society and economy, I think, in many ways. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Do we have any questions quickly?
Yes.
About the press data,
Yes.
I've been doing a lot of international work recently with countries where the press data is freely available and openly available, including geospatial locations and so on.
Yes.
Which isn't fully the case for the UK.
Yes.
Do you have anything, do you know any plans about that, or if there's going to come a point at which we're going to be able to get that freely available data for use in the UK?
No, I mean, there are lots of interested parties in everything that exists behind our national data sets. You know, they are updated dynamically on a daily basis and are highly accurate. You know, if that's going to happen, then somebody has to pay for it somewhere along the line. So if governments are willing to pay for it, I think there have been a couple of little test cases of that recently, then that may well happen. You know, we are, at the core of it, GeoPlace is about making sure that data gets into society and economy. We believe in the value of its use across society and economy. If government are going to fund it fully, that absolutely, we're all there. Yeah. But as we know, there are lots of other players in and behind that whole story.
Bob?
I kind of follow on from the last question. One of my favourite statistics is a UN statistic from a few years ago, which says, I've maybe said this before, of 8 billion people in the world, 4 billion don't have an address, and 1 billion, as a result of that, have no identity. So, what is an address?
Yes. Yeah.
What is an address, and what's the relationship with the world situation?
Yeah, my predecessor Richard Mason went out to India when he'd finished as MD, when he retired, and they were trying to establish a system and process. We go all the way back to some of the work we did in the early 90s, the kind of Hernando de Soto, kind of Peter Dale stuff, which is giving people an identity. You know, is the foundation of society, and address is a big part of that. Look, there are moves by lots of developing nations to establish these kinds of infrastructures and to establish addresses. It's not something I get involved in at all. I kind of keep a kind of a reading, watching brief on it. But if we could establish, at least some foundations for the globe, I think it could be hugely valuable. What we are finding, of course, is lots of the huge data integrators, system integrators from around the world are hoovering up whatever they can put their hands on in terms of this information. So they will be putting a value on it to a degree and creating identity through it. So, watch this space, I suppose, as those guys develop.
Last one really quick.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there is to a degree within Ordnance Survey data already for GB as the topographic identifier. So places and field boundaries, that's polygonized data, and every one of those will have one of those identifiers. For those where there are buildings, then we have the topographic identifier look up to the EPRN where there's an address. So I think that's probably the core of the solution. Is that what you were aiming at? And I know Ordnance Survey through NGD are doing a lot more with kind of field boundaries and so on. I know that sort of in the agricultural space, then when there's purchase and sale of rural land, then there is, in many cases, they come up with a naming and numbering scheme to identify fields within a particular sale package, as it were. But nothing of that type is formalised. But I think it's more coming back to NGD now and how the TOI reference develops for field parcels and other entities. Yeah. Cheeky one. Cheeky one.
I was just going to mention, what 3 words?
Yeah.
I mean, that identifies too, is it 3 metre squares?
3 metre squares, yeah.
I mean, you know, things like Find My Street, if we find any fly tipping,
Yes.
it's just what 3 words. I'm no idea what the address is.
No, no, and that's
Just what 3 words.
well, yeah, it's a wonderful reference, isn't it? For if I kind of think of what 3 words is the equivalent to the postcode in many ways. You're not identifying a particular entity. With UPRN, USRM, we're identifying those official streets and properties, and we can then link and connect to anything across government that is taxed. And we work with DVLA and we work with HMRC and others. So that kind of foundation of economy. And if you're wanting to do deliveries in city locations, you need that precision. If you're in rural areas, yeah, it's enormously helpful. So perhaps investment in a kind of a cross-reference would be helpful. But of course, you can do that spatially as well. Talk to Chris Shelton often and say, yeah. Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so much.